instantaneously. So that really, historically, it gets created or generated and it gets consumed at the same time. Now, there may be obviously a little bit of lag time there, but in general, it's simultaneous. Now, storage or storing electricity historically has been very impractical on a broad scale. Although what we've seen recently in the last few years is that the technologies are coming around to where you can actually begin to store electricity in an economic enough fashion that it can be applied on a broader scale. Now, the storage of electricity becomes, there's some really great applications for that we probably won't have a time to really discuss in any detail, but that's something that's very unique to electricity. Storage of it is just really not that practical at this point, but it's getting there. It requires an extensive delivery infrastructure, which is the grid. Now, to maintain the grid, it requires a constant balancing between generation or supply and load, which is the demand. And so in order to maintain the grid, there's people out there who constantly are monitoring the flow of electricity, and they're constantly adjusting levels of generation or the supply so that the supply and the demand are equal or as close to equal as possible within certain tolerances, because when they get out of balance, then you have problems. All right, so what I have here is I have a quick chart or a graphic that kind of shows you the main components of the grid. And let's go ahead and start at the top. That's the generation piece. Now, when we say generation, that's any device or facility or mechanism that actually creates electricity or generates electricity and then pushes it out onto the grid. As you well know, there's a lot of various types of generators we've got that are fueled by a number of different fuels: coal, natural gas, solar, wind. Any of those are generators. Historically, now then there's a transmission system. Now out west, the generators were typically or historically have been built in remote sites or far away from the load centers or the cities or the load centers where the demand is. And so those generators are connected to those load centers across what we call transmission lines. So the energy is generated in these power plants. It's pushed out onto these high voltage lines that typically go for hundreds of miles across country, and then they arrive at a location that's close to the load, or typically outside of these urban areas, and the voltage is stepped down and it enters into what we call a distribution system. And that distribution system is typically the wires and the devices and all the equipment that's required to distribute that electricity that's being dropped off of these high voltage lines into this urban area and out to the loads. And then the loads are really where the consumption occurs. And loads are typically fall into three categories. You've got like these heavy industrial loads, factories and production areas. You've got commercial loads, buildings, retail shops, those kinds of things. And then you've got residential loads. Okay? Now, that's just a very simplistic view of the grid system. So there's people, as I said, there's people that look at the grid and from a reliability perspective, and they're constantly monitoring to make sure that things flow smoothly. So who regulates the grid? Well, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission regulates the transmission and wholesale sale of electricity, and they also monitor energy markets. The North American Electric Reliability Corporation, or NERC, establishes reliability standards that the individuals that operate the grid have to adhere to. So they set the standards and say when you run a generator or when you operate the transmission system, or if you're looking at the distribution system, you have to operate it within certain tolerances and according to certain standards. If those standards are violated, then you're subject to financial penalties. There's regional reliability organizations are the enforcement arm of NERC, and they perform periodic audits of grid operators and can levy financial fines for noncompliance. As I said, then typically like your loads fall into a utility, and they're usually regulated by some sort of utility. Depending on where you live, there's a public utility commission or some sort of a governmental regulatory agency. The grid is divided up out west here. The grid is very fragmented, and so we have what we call balancing areas. And if you take the grid as a whole and look at the entire United States, all of these generators and transmission wires and loads all sit out here in the western United States. But what they've done is they carved up the grid into these various areas that are depicted on this map, and those are called balancing areas. And inside those balancing areas, these are arbitrary boundaries that have been established, and they usually fall in or coordinate with the service territory of large utilities. Down here in Arizona, it'd be Arizona Public Service or AZPS, Salt River Project or SRP. They run a balancing authority, and they have the responsibility as a utility to balance their loads and resources and to operate the grid in a reliable fashion. And so they're the ones that have the staff and the mechanisms in place to be able to run the grid reliably. Now, oftentimes, these same balancing authorities also operate a transmission system, and that transmission system also has they have capacity on that system to move energy across their transmission system. And so people oftentimes want to utilize that transmission system to move energy across systems. And so that transmission system falls under what they call a tariff. And the tariff controls the rules for the utilizing the transmission system. Let's move on. So how do you move energy across the grid? Well, as I said, what you do is each transmission provider has what they call an open access transmission tariff, or an OAT. Anyone wanting to move energy across someone's transmission system, you have to make a transmission service request on their website. And then FERC regulates all the transmission tariffs to assure that the rates or the fees or the tolls that you pay are just and reasonable. And so if I'm generating energy in Arizona and I want to move it up to Nevada, I have to procure or make arrangements along the transmission systems to facilitate the movement of that energy from Arizona up to Nevada. And I do that by determining my path, and then I go out and procure or make a reservation on the OASIS site of the transmission operator who owns the transmission system that I want to cross. And I reserve it, there's a rate that I pay, and that sort of thing. So what if you want to connect to the grid, like if you're you want to put in a generator or something like that, then that's called an interconnection, and it really depends on your generator size. And so there's rules about how to interconnect, and the interconnection also depends on maybe your impact onto the network. But really what it amounts is FERC allows free and unfettered access to the grid, and so the transmission system is heavily regulated by FERC, and they're there to make sure that no one entity or utility is exerting unusual power. They're not hoarding the transmission, but they're providing a fair and equitable access to the transmission system, because the transmission system really is a finite resource. There's only so much of it. And so they're there, FERC regulates that to make sure that there's equal access and to facilitate the exchange of energy between parties. So how can clean energy products meet demand on the grid? Well, the clean energy products can really, they fall into a lot of different categories, but if you have a utility scale project like a solar project that's fairly large in size, it's more capacity than what you would ultimately be consuming, that can replace outdated generation resources in the wholesale supply chain. Community scale project or small individual installations, i.e. like a rooftop solar, can displace the need for the utility provided resources. So you kind of control your own destiny. So, and then many clean energy products can also provide the host utility with other ancillary benefits. So there really are some benefits that the tribes potentially can realize through the development of clean energy projects, depending on the size. But a lot of it is this understanding the grid, who runs it, and the various components is really powerful when you have a knowledge of how the grid works and who the parties are. Then you can begin to negotiate and understand what type of leverage you have at the negotiating tables. So when you have, the tribes have land. They may have land that's valuable for the development of these utility scale projects. You also have load to serve. But what's important is if you seek information that's going to assist you in developing a long-range energy plan, and once you gain that knowledge, then you can leverage your assets to your advantage. And that's all I have. So I'd be happy to take questions either now or I guess at the end. All right? Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Alan. Or, sorry, Al. Appreciate your presentation. And as you said, yes, we will be having questions at the end. And someone has asked if these presentations will be available after the call, and they will be. So do we have Laura McKelvey on the line?
I think so. Can you hear me now?
Great. Thanks, Laura, for your patience. Sorry about the confusion. That was my bad. Okay. So would you like me to turn the computer screen over to you now?
Sure.
Okay, great.
Okay. I'm not sure what just happened. Andy, I just lost the whole thing.
I do see your screen.
I don't see my screen. Oh my. Well, I'm just going to go through the PowerPoint. You're just going to have to change slides. So on,
sure.
If you'll go, and I'm sorry, this is a lot of material, and we don't have to go through all of it. But let me just start with just an overview of why we're starting this. You know, climate change is a big threat to the U.S., and we're already feeling the change. So we started the Clean Power Plan to really start dealing with carbon emissions. So Andy, if you go on to slide 2, please. So we've got back in August, August 3rd, the administrator signed 3 different actions. The first was finalizing the Clean Power Plan for existing sources, and a set of carbon pollution standards for new and modified and reconstructed sources. At the same time, we proposed a federal plan and model rules that will implement the Clean Power Plan. And I'll go into the distinctions between those in a minute. And then, it's just important to remember that that these actions will achieve significant pollution reductions and deliver an approach that gives the states and utilities time and flexibility to meet the goals that are set in the Clean Power Plan, protect reliability, and provide for affordable power for consumers. And then the Clean Power Plan and these actions will spur increased investment in renewable energy. So if you go to slide 3, we won't linger on this slide, but it really does show why we targeted for the Clean Power Plan and for the other rules, the utilities. If you look at the slide, 82% of the greenhouse gases are carbon dioxide, And of the greenhouse gases that get emitted, the power sector is really the highest source of emissions of the whole inventory that's out there. So if you go on to slide 5, I'm sorry, we're going to skip that. So what the Clean Power Plan does, as you guys know, the Clean Air Act is set up in such a way that EPA sets, in this case, guidelines that the states are envisioned to implement. And so it sets up this partnership between EPA and the states to reduce carbon emissions from the big power plants. The part of the Clean Air Act that we're dealing with under this rule is 111D, and it sets out guidelines for the states on how to address carbon emissions by setting the best system of emission reduction that affects power plants. We do that by looking at 3 different building blocks: the fossil fuel fired, for the fossil fuel boy, I can't even talk today. Fossil fuel fired EGUs, we set performance rates for both the coal fossil fuel fired EGUs, but also for natural gas combined cycle EGUs, and the EGUs are the electric generating units. So we set those building blocks based on the performance rates for both of those 2 different subcategories of electric generating units. And then we create a state-based goal for each state depending on the mix of power plants that they have in their states or had in their states operating in 2012. So 2012 is the baseline. So when we say that the Clean Power Plan is a guideline, it is just that. It tells the states what their goal is, what they're supposed to meet as far as achieving carbon emission reductions. But it also tells us, the states what we're looking for in their plan, how the plan has to be structured and how it has to be submitted and how they have to be implemented. So those guidelines really kind of give the framework for how the states are supposed to develop their plan. If you go to slide 6, I just wanted to throw this up here so folks could see the distribution of the facilities, and let you know on the Clean Power Plan website we have a quote story map where you can actually click on each of these bubbles and get more information about each of the facilities. So if you go on to slide 7, I'm going really fast because I know we have a limited time. I talked about this just a minute ago. The way we set the best system of emission reductions and the goals for the state is we set a performance rate for the fossil fuel fired EGUs, the coal fired EGUs, and the natural gas combined cycle EGUs. We set an emission rate for each type of source category. And then we looked at, okay, how many of each type of power plant do we have? How much potential renewable energy does each state have? And then we combine those to get a unique state goal. We develop those goals both based on rate, but also mass. And the rate and the mass become very important in how the states will structure their programs in the future. Under a rate-based program, they will work through emission rate credits, and under a mass-based program, they'll work through an allowance-based process. So those 2 pieces give the states, the way that those goals are structured, give the states some flexibility on how they set their programs. In addition, we've also provided some additional flexibility. Some states might want to bring in their whole power sector and include their new sources in that, and that's the mass-based goal with a new source complement. So again, the states have flexibility on how they're going to structure their program. Okay, if you go to slide 8, and this is really kind of where some of the accountability comes into it. The state goals, the state plans have to achieve a level of emission reduction in steps. We call it a glide path along the way. So they get a first set of reductions that they have to get in place in the compliance period between 2002 and 2022 and 2024. They have a second compliance period between 2025 and 2027, and a third compliance period between 28 and 29, with the final goal that everyone has to achieve by 2030 and beyond. So the state plans really have to show us how they're going to meet that. We've put some guidance in there in the Clean Power Plan on how to choose their glide path, but they don't have to follow that. They can choose their own as long as they're meeting the targets at the end, or at the beginning and the end. So the renewable, the other thing to keep in mind is that even though the goals are set based on the mix of the electric generating units, all of the programs really encourage and have incentives for renewable energy and energy efficiency. And those will really be important to help the states meet their goals in the future. And so there is incentives for investment in renewable energy to help the states under all of the approaches that are laid out in the program. Similarly, there's incentives for energy efficiency improvements because that will help offset the need for generating power and thus reduce carbon pollution. So if you keep moving, the Clean Power Plan also lays out guidance. If you're on slide 10, I'm sorry, yep. This is the schedule for the state plan submittals. The final rule was signed on August 3rd of this year. The states have until September 6th to make their initial submittal. They can give us a full, complete plan on the 6th if they want to, but they also have the option of giving us an initial submittal that will give us a roadmap on how they're going to develop their plans, kind of a direction on whether they're going to go a rate-based program or a mass-based program. They have to tell us how they're going to involve communities and tribes in their processes. So there are some guidance in the Clean Power Plan and the proposed federal plan that flesh out what the expectations are for this initial submittal. If they do an initial submittal, they can request an extension to 2008, September 6, 2018. And so as long as they meet the guidance that we've put out there for this initial submittal, that they have an additional 2 years to develop their plans more completely. That they have to give us a final plan by September 2018, and then their first compliance period, as I mentioned before, starts January of 2022. So that plan has to start achieving emission reductions, and the states have to meet their goals by that date, with the final goal, as I mentioned before, January 1st, 2030. So if you move on to slide 11, and Andy, I know I'm going to run out of time, so if we want to cut this off at any point, just let me know, and I can
no, keep going, Laura. That's great.
Okay, so in developing their plans, the states have many different options. They can work just within their state to meet their goals. They can actually not do any trading at all. They can put requirements on the power plants and say this is how you're going to operate. Or they can do trading within the states, or they can trade amongst the states. So the Clean Power Plan lays out a lot of flexibility on how to do that. If a state does multi-state planning, the Clean Power Plan lays out the mechanisms that a trading-ready state will have to meet in order to have credible either emission reduction credits or allowances so that they can be part of this trading program. If they're a trading ready state, they can opt into using the federal trading program that we've got in place. There will be a tracking system that EPA will have that will help administer the program, both in the areas where the feds, EPA, will run a federal plan, but also in some of these states that are going to be trading across jurisdictions. And we've got we already have this program kind of in place. We've been doing it under the NOx SIPCAL and the cross-state rule, and then the acid rain program. So hopefully that'll help ease some of the burden for some of the states if they're going to do this multi-state trading. Again, the states have different pathways that they can choose in developing their plans, and there's some information about this in the Clean Power Plan, but also we get into a little bit more detail on all of the structure of the state programs and how this will work in the proposed federal plan and the proposed model rules that we put out, again, back on August 3rd. So we're inviting comment on some of the structure of how the mass-based program and rate-based model trading programs would work, that the states can either adopt on their own or do something different. And we're also taking comment on a lot of different ideas around how the state's trading programs might work. Okay, if you go on to slide 12. I'm not going to go through all of these, but these are just some of the ways that carbon reductions can be achieved and can be incorporated into the trading program. So they're there as a reference for the future. If you go to slide 13, part of if you look at the compliance deadlines, the first compliance deadline is 2022. But we don't want people to wait to start achieving carbon emission reductions. So we've built in the Clean Power Plan early incentives. We've created a clean energy incentive program to incentivize early investments that generate wind and solar power, and also to encourage energy efficiency and energy reductions on the demand side of things. So we will be looking at crediting programs that make those reductions in the 2020-2021 timeframe. The CEIP right now is a quote matching fund program that states can choose to opt into to incentivize wind and solar power and energy efficiency activities. Particularly, we're targeting implementation of this program in low-income, minority, and indigenous communities. And so it's really something to kind of keep in mind. What it does is it provides matching allowances or emission rate credits to states that participate. There's a larger match for energy efficiency projects and renewable energy in low-income minority communities. And so this is going to be really an incentive to help, particularly to help those states that are going to have more of a challenge in meeting their goals. So the idea is to help jumpstart some of these programs and to really get people to explore using energy efficiency, renewable energy projects, and to kind of set models for the future. And right now, the CEIP is discussed conceptually in the Clean Power Plan and in the federal plan, but we're going to be proposing some more detailed actions in the near future, followed by some listening sessions. So kind of keep an eye out for that. This is going to be one place that we're going to be looking for a lot of input on how we structure the CEIP program so it meets the goals of incentivizing the early reductions, but also meets the goals of bringing in low-income minority communities. On slide 14, you've probably heard this many times. There are three tribes, Navajos, the Ute, and Fort Mojave, that have affected sources. As in all of our programs, the tribes may develop their own plans and take delegation of the federal plan, but if they don't choose to take on the program, EPA will cover the implementation of the Clean Power Plan through the federal plan that's out for proposal. The way that the Clean Power Plan is been structured, the sources in Indian country have the ability to participate in the trading programs and across jurisdictions. And so we'll go into a lot more detail of that in the training that's going to come up next week on how the tribes without affected sources can participate. Okay, on slide 15, I'm not going to go through these next slides in great detail, but I wanted to just touch base and remind people that, you know, we really wanted to make sure in the Clean Power Plan that there was input and engagement of low-income, minority, and indigenous populations in the development of the state plans and the federal programs. So we put in language that encouraged the states to do proximity analysis and demographic analysis to help target communities and to actively outreach to them. We asked them to bring the vulnerable populations to the table. We're going to be providing resources to the states on how to do analysis, give them models of states that already have good programs, and try to support that. Similarly, we're trying to support communities and help them with resources that they can use to engage in the state plan development. We've encouraged the states to consider multi-pollutant planning approaches to really optimize not just the reductions of carbon, but to see if there's opportunities to benefit for their planning for ozone and PM and sulfur dioxide and some of the other pollutants so that they're making decisions that not only can impact climate change on the global level, but also to ensure that we're not exacerbating any local air quality issues near and around the facilities. And then again, through the Clean Energy Incentive Program, we want the communities that are most impacted to really benefit from the program. And so we've asked the states to consider that in the process. I'm going to go ahead and skip to slide 19. These other slides I think are good references, but I wanted to touch on the federal plan a little bit. We are, uh-oh, did I do something wrong? Everybody still there?
Yeah, we can hear you, Laura.
Okay. The federal plan, we proposed a federal plan that will apply where states don't develop a plan, and also for Indian country where the tribes, the three with affected sources, don't develop a plan. We also are proposing model trading rules for the states that they can use as a model to start their program and their plan. They don't have to use the model, but it would be a cost-effective way of kind of moving their programs forward. Both the federal plan and the model rules have the same elements. It sets the performance standards. It has monitoring record-keeping requirement. It has compliance schedules. You know, it achieves the emission reductions that are laid out in the Clean Power Plan. And it preserves reliability. We're co-proposing for the federal plan both a rate-based plan and a mass-based plan. It's not clear yet which of these, right now I think that we're looking to do one that will be either mass or rate-based, but we're asking for comment on that. And as we, you know, kind of moving forward, we're looking for our comments on the plan altogether. So if you move to the next slide, we're only going to be finalizing the federal plan for those states that don't submit a plan. We'll have to act on it based on the state's failure to submit. Or in addition, we have proposed in this federal plan to find it appropriate and necessary to implement the federal plan in Indian country. So that follows the requirements of the Tribal Authority Rule. if a state or a tribe decide in the future they want to submit their own plan and it gets approved, then just like with a TIP, it would replace the federal plan. Again, we intend to finalize one approach, either mass or rate-based, but we are taking comment on that. You know, there are places where the state can take delegation and administrative some parts of the federal plan, tribes as well. So we specifically took comment on what are the appropriate places where states can take a delegation of the administration of some of the federal plan. The states can also submit partial plans that will take on, you know, so that some of the requirements may be covered by a state plan and some might be covered by a federal plan. So they can do a piecemeal a little bit in this program. So they can also adopt complementary measures outside of the plan to facilitate compliance and lower costs that benefit power generation and consumers. So I think that covers this slide. And then my last slide on the Clean Power Plan is just information sources. So if you want to Google you click on this Clean Power Plan slide, the second bullet, this story map is the map I was telling you about that has a lot of information about the sources that are impacted in across the country. So it's things to know about how EPA's Clean Power Plan. This is a really good information source for folks. So all of this is good information, but I did want to call your attention to this one specifically because I think the map would be really helpful for tribes as they move forward. Andy, if you click on number 3 here on the side. Yeah, there you go. Each of these slides, each of these bubbles has a different set of information, but this is the map. So choose one of the dots. There you go. So if you click on it, you get information about the facility, its emissions, and so that it's a good thing to play around with so that you can see what sources are near you and around you. That's where that is. And I thought this might be helpful to point out to you guys as you're submitting your comments. So Andy, that's it for the Clean Power Plan part of the presentation. Do you want me to go through the public comment process, or you want to do that later?
We'll do that at the end. I'd like to be sure we have time to get Bob in for his presentation. And just as a reminder, if folks do have questions during this presentation, please be sure to mark your questions in the question box. And we've had a couple come in that we'll get to after Bob's presentation. I'd like to introduce Bob Gruenig, who sits on National Tribal Air Association's Policy Advisory Committee. And for folks who might remember, we did submit comments. NTA submitted comments on the draft Clean Power Plan, and we'll be submitting comments on the federal plan once it's announced in the Federal Register. So Bob, I'd like to turn it over to you if you're on the line.
Yes, Andy, go to the next slide, please.
Great. Sorry, my mouse is, there you go.
Okay, so Andy mentioned there were comments submitted on the Clean Power Plan. It's out in draft form. It came out in August. It has not been published in the Federal Register as yet. It's a very voluminous document. I think double-spaced. It's over 1,500 pages, so there's a lot in there. Wanted to give you a brief understanding of the comments that were submitted and how they might relate to the proposed federal plan that's out. Number 1, building blocks. The NTA commented on all 4 building blocks at the time, one being reducing carbon intensity of electricity generation at individually affected EGUs through rate improvements. A second building block was reducing emissions from most carbon-intensive affected EGUs by shifting energy generation to less carbon-intensive EGUs one of the concerns raised by the NTA is that there's a big push to shift energy generation to natural gas units. There was a concern about natural gas fracking and methane leakage for these efforts. A third building block was reducing emissions from all affected EGUs by shifting energy generation to low or zero carbon emitting units, such as solar and wind energy. Also at that time, the EPA was proposing nuclear energy and biomass energy, so the NTA commented on that. And the last building block, which actually was taken out of the final rule, was reducing emissions through demand-side energy efficiency. Now, states can pursue that in the final rule, but it's not through the Clean Energy Incentive Program that Laura mentioned, but it's not considered part of the building blocks. The second point that the EPA, the NTA focused on were multi-state plans. In the proposed power plan, as it's also come out, there's a big push to get states to come together and participate in trading programs. And so the tribes wanted to have an opportunity not only to consult with EPA, but also states on this process. How would they fit into it? One of the comments that was put forward was to have states participate by helping, have tribes participate by helping states meet their emission budgets. Basically, if a tribe developed a renewable energy project on its land or an energy efficiency project using using those projects and contributing to a state plan, so if a state needed to, they were over a certain amount in their emissions budget, this would help offset that, these projects. So the Clean Energy Incentive Program that Laura spoke about, there's going to be more detail coming out about that. But under the Clean Power Plan, and as discussed in the proposed federal plan, that tribes could engage in projects on their land in renewable energy or energy efficiency, and use those to help states meet their emission goals, and ultimately have states purchase those, make purchases of these, whatever comes out of these programs, and states, the tribes could use the monies to help their, for various things. Also, there was a push to use and fund the historic regional planning organizations. There's been 5 throughout the U.S. That did not come through in the proposed plan or the Clean Power Plan. So that's, and that has been something the NTA has been pushing for a number of years of having engagement in the regional planning organizations. As far as cap and trade programs, with the state and multi-state trading programs, the NTA had a concern about co-pollutant hotspots, depending where energy generation needs to be shifted within the larger trading program area. So there's a concern of what the impacts might be to Indian country. And again, what focus of the rule is on greenhouse gases, but the co-pollutant issues are certainly there and of concern. And so EPA has indicated that it's going to assess the impacts of these plans as they go forward and seek to mitigate them. Although specifics about mitigation have not been discussed at this point because the plans have not been put in place. As far as a national cap, with the cap trade program nationally, the NTA proposed a tribal set-aside model after the Western Regional Air Partnership, where X number of allowances would be provided to tribes annually, and there would have to be some mechanism for distributing these allowances, and these allowances could be used for a myriad of different things that tribes might want to use it for. So it was kind of unique in the RAP region, but it's something that the NTA continues to bring up. Environmental justice, tribes are included in the environmental justice movement. Executive Order 12898 includes tribes. There was a concern raised as far as what the impacts to tribes would be based on the individual EGUs that are covered under the plan. So Laura mentioned there was a proximity analysis done by EPA. It only covers a 3-mile radius, but it was something that EPA encourage a state as a starting point that not only should they can be self-consulting with the communities within 3 miles of these power plants, but to go even further. And it's unlikely that many tribal communities are within the 3-mile radius, so it's something that tribes might want to bring up with the proposed federal plan. And then, of course, tribal consultation is always an issue that the NTA is very concerned about. And so there was an initial statement saying that the rule didn't have any tribal implications, and the NTA weighed in on it and showed how there might be impacts. Next slide, Andy. I'm trying to rush through this as quickly as I can. Okay, so with the proposed federal plan, you can't make any comments about the underlying Clean Power Plan, the specific how things have been laid out for the states going forward. You have to be, but you can actually make comments tangentially related to the Clean Power Plan. As far as the proposed federal plan right now, I stopped counting at 200. There are a number of places in the proposed plan where EPA is seeking comments. Many of them are specific to the model rules, federal plan, not necessarily specific to tribal issues. Others would have relevance to tribes. I won't go too much. I won't discuss rate-based, mass-based. Laura's already discussed that, so we'll just go on to the next slide. Okay, and just a quick snapshot here. Rate-based plans, you can get emission rate credits. There's set-asides under the rate-based plan, the Clean Energy Incentive Program, a set-aside for renewable energy projects, and demand-side energy efficiency projects under the CEIP program. These are projects that tribes could participate on their lands, and the energy savings that they achieve through those projects could be sold and passed on to states to meet their specific emission budgets. A mass-based plan, it's based on allowances, and again, set-asides are under there. Specifically, Clean Energy Incentive Program, renewable energy projects are, again, items that tribes can participate and benefit. Not only benefit the state, but benefit themselves in the process. Next slide, please. Okay, with that, to speak about impactful and substantive comments, before even getting to the specifics of the rules, I think it's important that you could be doing the groundwork right now. I've discussed this in various presentations before, but it's really important to establish your identity. It's really hard to know what the effects of the proposal will be on your community unless you know who you are. So you really need to tell the story from your tribal perspective. It's the information that the rule writers don't have in front of them that you need to tell them. Some of the things to consider are sharing your tribal values, sacred, cultural, economic values, for instance. Geography, what does your land base look like acreage-wise, land use? Are you in a desert region, mountain region, the plains regions, and also your legal rights, treaty rights on and off the reservation, trust versus non-trust lands. If you have treatment as a state, which could have impact with this proposed rule as far as having delegation for certain aspects of the program, if you have a source in particular. As far as gathering data, some of the data you might want to consider gathering for your tribal identity is providing a reservation map in proposed comments. It shows the location of schools, hospitals, senior care facilities, natural resources, agriculture. That's very important to your community. Let EPA know that. Existing air quality right now, what do you have as far as emissions inventory, modeling, monitoring, your demographics, tribal versus non-tribal people on the reservation, young versus old, males versus females. Any health data, certainly health impacts are a major concern for any proposed rule. So having a baseline to base your comments on is very important. And what is your economy dependent upon? How would this rule impact it? As far as personalizing the comment letter, first of all, again, you would want to go to your tribal identity, identify your tribe and its interest in the regulatory action, indicate the main points that you're going to be addressing, kind of laying out a roadmap for EPA. And again, you're providing more of a snapshot of your tribe that, again, goes back to tribal identity. Lay out your individual discussion points about the proposed rule, and every time you relate it to your tribal identity. So every time you make a comment about the rule, how does this relate to your tribe? Keep reminding the reader what it's about. Offer alternatives and recommendations where you can, and just have a really short closing. Some initial thoughts for your comments you might want to consider. Again, it's a very voluminous document. Set-asides are, I think, an area that you might want to consider commenting on. Maximizing the amount available for renewable energy and energy efficiency projects that tribes can take advantage of. You want to maybe recommend a specific tribal set-aside, a general one like the RAP, or having one under the federal program, having a renewable energy efficiency set-aside that would be specific for tribes, so that the tribes, if they wanted to develop these projects that would contribute to state plans, the entity they would be dealing with would be the EPA and not the states themselves. EPA has a trust responsibility for tribes, so there might be a better mechanism working, tribes with EPA versus working with states. Vulnerable and overburdened communities is discussed often in the Clean Power Plan and the proposed plan. There is no definition for what that means. It's very broad right now, so you might want to consider proposing a definition that takes tribes into consideration. There's going to be outreach for these communities on a national webinar and a regional webinar and outreach activities. Those are good, those are important, but do keep in mind that tribes are sovereign, and that relates to tribal consultation, that they should be treated above and beyond anything that is provided to folks in the environmental justice community. And okay, I've already talked about with that same community as far as the 3-mile radius and the proximity analysis. It's really not capturing, probably it's not going to capture a lot of tribes, so trying to expand that. Plan impacts, I already talked about. EPA is going to conduct an assessment of what the impacts of these plans will be. You might want to look at that further. And tribal consultation, I've already talked about. And federal plan, if you if your tribe is one of the 3 tribes that have sources on their lands that will be affected by this proposed rule, or tribes that might want to look at it later on, commenting on that. Next slide. Okay, as far as how the NTA is going to proceed with evaluating the proposal, there's already been a few folks looking at this proposed rule and extracting. I've been taking a look at it, but additionally going to conduct some cursory research, looking at the EPA fact sheets, participating in the webinars as they become available, checking regulations.gov for comments of other organizations, other entities as they submit them, see if there's any relevance to issues in Indian country, looking at fact sheets and comment letters from other organizations, and just having personal contacts with tribes and states on this. This is a very important, impactful proposed rule, and so it's going to be really important that communication is maximized among the parties that are going to be affected. Number 2, these are things you can use yourself as well. Review the table of contents for any keywords that strike the NTA or tribes as important. So the table of contents is really important. Number 3, the most important part of any proposed rule that's out there, in my opinion, is looking at the preamble section. It communicates the intent of EPA, what its considerations have been regarding states, tribes, etc. So the preamble is a very important area for you to focus on. Do searches on comments, on the word comment and the word tribe, to try to narrow down any possible issues for which comments should be made with respect to tribes. And finally, review the 3 main executive orders in every proposed rule that would have impacts often to tribes, and many folks are familiar with Executive Order 13175. And again, that's something NTA always looks at very closely. Executive Order 13045, protection of children with populations, youth in Indian country want to be concerned about any impact any proposed rule. And then Executive Order 12898, focus on environmental justice. That is it.
Great, thanks, Bob. At this point, we do just hope to go a few minutes over. There were some questions asked on the webinar screen, so I'd like to go to those. And I think the first question probably is best answered by Laura, and this was asked by Jim Powell. What is the expected schedule for legal challenges to the Clean Power Plan, and what impact will have that on the timeline?
Oh, well, there's no challenges that are, they can't really, nobody can challenge us until after it's been published in the Federal Register. And so we expect it to be published sometime this month. I'm not, I don't know specific days, and I don't know that we've heard any specific days on that. Generally, there's a 60-day notice of intent to sue, and then followed by the suits. But so, I think unless the court remands or stays, once the challenge happens, it takes a while to resolve. The intention is for us to continue to move forward unless we get a remand or a stay from the court. So we'll be moving forward as the lawsuits kind of work their way through the process. There will be some. We already know that there are some that folks are waiting for that publication to go forward, but at this point I don't see that it's going to affect our timelines.
Great, thanks, Laura. The next question comes from Bill Thompson, NTA's chairman, and he asks, is this correct? Anonymous comments are not accepted. Tribes have to identify themselves to be taken seriously. And Bob, is that your experience?
Well, Laura can speak to this. I don't think there's anything that prevents you from submitting an anonymous comment, but I think it's important to identify if you're going to submit. If it's a concern to your tribe, you should identify yourself, and that's why you should not only identify yourself, but share your identity about your tribe, why this is so important for you to be commenting, and how it will impact you or impact your community.
I think that any written comment that we receive, we have to respond to. Any comment, oral or written, we receive, we have to respond to. I think the oral comments through the public hearing, I think you're required to identify yourself at the public hearing, just because it's an in-person event. But we have to respond to the comments that we receive. I think knowing who has made the comment helps us give context and may help us to understand the comment more. But if it's a public comment, it's a public comment. We need to address it. Great.
Thanks, Laura. Well, those are all the questions we had. We're just slightly over the top of the hour, so I appreciate everyone's time. I did want to just point out some of the folks on the webinar today will be attending a training that's happening next week in Las Vegas at the TAM Center for tribal governmental employees attending a several-day training on the Clean Power Plan, and Laura McKelvey and others will be there. Also, ITEP is working with EPA to host several community trainings focused in the Southwest that will be happening in November for community members, and that will be, like I said, sometime in November. In addition, I just want to let folks know that NTA will be following the Clean Power Plan and several of the policy issues. When NTA submits comments on the Clean Power Plan, has other webinars available and other resources for tribes will be posted on our website. We have a policy response kit page here, and we have several policy response kits available for tribes to use to submit comments to EPA and other federal agencies on comment periods that are open. So right now, for example, there's a tribal treaty rights and tribal consultation comment period that's open for EPA, and you can click here and find NTA's comment that was submitted, as well as a template letter that you can use to submit comments in the future. So that's available for you, and also, as always, feel free to contact us if you have any questions or comments or things that you want to see NTA doing to provide support for your tribe. At this point, I would like to thank all the presenters, Al Austin from WAPA, Laura McKelvey from EPA, and Bob Grunig from NTA's Policy Advisory Committee. Thanks, everyone, and let's see what the fall brings for the Clean Power Plan. Thanks, everyone, for your time. This concludes our webinar today. Have a great day.